Good morning, everybody. Hope that you're having a great morning so far. I'm going to be filling in for Jimmy this week. He is not feeling well. We're praying that he gets better quickly. But I'm going to go ahead and fill in on this Sunday school lesson for you. And I hope that you've got a chance to look over the lesson. Hope you've got a chance to read through the passages. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 37 and then kind of talk about 38 and 39 as well. And the story of one of the greatest kings of Israel, Hezekiah. He was one of the kings that was faithful to God, did what God called him to do, and just we're going to see in these stories. He was a God that God answered some big prayers for, and if growing up or maybe now, for those of you who are parents, you remember that time where you were told to do something once and it was important then, but maybe you ignored it, and then it got said a couple more times, but by the third or fourth time you realize that this is a very serious thing, that there's going to be consequences if you don't do it. And if last Monday we had the associational meeting, and the pastor there spoke on prayer. It was a big part of what he spoke about. And then remember Wednesday, if you were there Wednesday, we talked about prayer, and today we are going to be talking about prayer. And then it's important that we see that God is pushing this with us, because prayer is such a vital part of our lives as believers. And the story of Hezekiah is just a powerful story about what prayer can do. But it's a story in our life to see how important prayer is when everything is falling apart and when everything is good. Because Hezekiah has some different experiences when things are good that we're going to talk about. And I hope it's an encouragement to you this morning as you've looked through these passages to see what God can do in prayer and what he's calling to do. So we're going to start off in Hezekiah chapter 37. And leading up to this, stuff you need to know is that at this point, Judah is still partially under the control of Assyria. They have to pay them taxes, tribute, and at this point, Hezekiah is not doing that. And so the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, is coming down to Judah to stop any revolts that might be coming in. And by the time he gets to Jerusalem, he didn't go there first. He had already attacked several cities, and at one point, believe it's in the book of Micah, it talks about 40 cities that have been destroyed. And so he had been very successful coming in on this campaign, and now he is around Jerusalem with many soldiers, and there is little to no hope that Hezekiah can defend this on his own. They're going to start a siege that is going to be very difficult for him. So Hezekiah is here in Jerusalem with everyone that they have, and the king of Assyria is sending a letter to Hezekiah telling him, you can trust in your God if you want to, but every other nation did, and every other nation was destroyed. Every single one of them. You don't need to be trusting in a God that will not save you. My God is more powerful. I am more powerful than your God, and you need to relent now. And Assyria, because it had been very successful in all the campaigns that they had done, and even with here, Hezekiah knows the danger that they're in, and so do the people, because the king of Assyria writes this letter in a language that everyone is going to understand. And so when his envoy reads it at the city gates, all the people hear it, and they know the trouble that they're in. So we're going to pick it up in Isaiah chapter 37, and I read verses 14 through 20, and we're going to see what Hezekiah does. It says, Hezekiah received the letter from the hands of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to all nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into fire. For they were no gods, but the works of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, Save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. So Hezekiah gets this letter from Sennacherib and his messengers, and he reads it, and he knows everything and that he is saying in that letter is true, except for the fact that God couldn't deliver them. But he knows that Assyria is powerful. He knows they have been victorious. He knows that other nations have relied on their gods, and their gods have been burned in fire. He knows what Sennacherib is capable of. And so you see Hezekiah, and the first thing that he does when he reads the letter, he doesn't get his generals together. He doesn't have a war council. He goes straight to the temple. And when he gets to the temple, he takes this letter, he spreads it out before God, and he prays. And he's saying in his prayer, you see his willingness to trust God, his realization that God is the only hope that he has. But he starts off going to the temple, first and foremost, laying it out before God, saying, God, this is what the letter says. It's very true, but I need your help. And there's a lot of things that we could see in Hezekiah's prayer that I hope that stuck out to you. And the first one is that he remembered who God is. Such an important part of our life as Christians. And we talked about that Wednesday if you were there too. Starting off a prayer, remembering who God is. And you see that he says several things here. He calls God the Lord of hosts. He's surrounded in Jerusalem by lots of people, and he knows the dangers that he's in, but he knows who is fighting for him. He knows the hosts that are on his side. And if you give a story coming out of Elisha, when there's a nation surrounding him, and he is there, and there's an army there that's going to attack, and when they're doing that, Elisha's servant, is there and is afraid because he doesn't know that God's on their side, but God is on their side. And okay, sorry everybody, a little bit of a cut in the video while I was waiting for that dog to start barking at me. So you remember the story of Elisha, and he's surrounded, and he prays, and he says, God, open the eyes of my servant. And he prays, and the servant sees the host of angels that are there. And Hezekiah knows that it doesn't matter how many soldiers Sennacherib has. It matters how many God has. And God is all powerful. God has a Lord. He is the Lord of hosts, and there is nothing that he can't do. And so he goes before, and he says, God, you are the Lord of hosts. You are the God of Israel. In this time especially, they thought that their gods lived in specific countries, specific areas. And so if you're in your country, your God would protect you. And this God of Israel is the one that's going to protect them there in Israel. But he knew above and beyond that not only was he the God of Israel, he was the creator of the whole world. Every single nation was under his control. And he reminds God, he says, you are great, and you are the only God. There is no one else. Assyria might come here with a powerful army, but they do not come here with a God. They come here with false gods made of wood and stone. You are the only true God. And then he says that you are enthroned above the cherubim, and that's a reference to the Ark of the Covenant, God's the place where God's presence lived on earth in the temple. And so he remembers that God is there. He remembers that God is powerful. He remembers that God is the creator, and overall, he is the only God. And if you'll go back and you'll look at that passage again, and look how many times you see the word Lord in all caps. And when the English Bible, when they put the word Lord in all caps, they do that because it's referring to God's proper name, Yahweh. And you'll see that a lot in that passage because he is trusting in God's covenant-keeping love. That was the name that God gave to Moses when he said, tell them I am has sent me. And that's the one that Hezekiah is trusting right now, the God that has always come through. So he starts off this prayer by remembering who God is. And then he goes before him and he's honest. He says, God, this letter is not false. The Syrians have come and attacked many people, and we're in a dangerous situation. Now he trusts God and he knows that God can come through, but he's honest about the situation he's facing. And when we have faith in God, when we trust in God, that doesn't mean that suddenly all our problems go away. It doesn't mean that suddenly none of our problems exist. Hezekiah is well aware of the danger they are in, but he trusts God. He's honest with God because in the end we know that God knows what's on our hearts. He knows what we're going through. So there's no reason for us to be anything but honest. And he is. He goes before God and he's honest and he brings this request to God. And he says, God, we can't do this. We need you to save us. He comes before him and says, God, we need you. And in this moment, in this very dark time, Hezekiah knew without a shadow of a doubt that they needed God to step in. This is a God-sized problem that only he could fix. And so he goes before God and he says, God, we need your help. We need you to save us. And there's something very important when he's doing this in there. He says, God, I want you to glorify your name in this so that all the people of the world will know that you are God alone. And as we're going to God with our requests and we're being honest, there's an important part of prayer that is remembering that God's glory is our main goal. That is why we are here. That is God's main goal. And in this passage, Hezekiah said, "I want you to save us, not just to save us, but so everyone will know that you are God." And in this passage, God's glory meant saving Israel. But there are some times in our lives where that's a little bit different. You think of the story of Jesus in the garden. He's going before God. He said, "Father, if there's any way that I could not have this cup, please take it from me. But your will be done." Even when we don't get the answer that we're looking for, our greatest goal is still for God to get the glory and people to see who God is. And Hezekiah knew that. He knew in this moment that it was about God getting the glory, just as much as it was about the nation being saved. And so he goes before God with this prayer, and he comes and he says, God, I remember who you are. God, I know that you are powerful. I come before you, Lord, and I'm facing a difficult situation, and I need your help, and I want you to be glorified. And in this story, we're not going to be able to read all of it, but we see that night, God sends an angel into the camp of Sennacherib and destroys the army, and he goes back without a victory. And a lot of time in this time they had people that were recording history, and Assyria does not obviously does not record God destroying all their army. They're not going to, but it does record that after going through all the land, he left Jerusalem alone, and that was very and Jerusalem and Hezekiah alone, and that was very unusual for them. Not something they would have normally done. So it's just another sign that the Bible is true and that God is able to do above and beyond anything we could possibly imagine. And so he's there. He's saved Israel, and Judah is safe for now. Obviously, we know at the end of this story they are going to go to captivity in Babylon, but right now God has saved Jerusalem because of Hezekiah's prayer. He didn't go to his friends. He didn't go to his generals. He went straight to the temple, straight to God with his request. And this story is one that is kind of a little bit repeated in chapter 38, but in a different situation. And we're not going to read all of them. But in chapter 38, Hezekiah is sick. He's not doing well. And Isaiah comes to him and he says, I have a word from God. You're not going to recover. This is going to be your end. And the story records immediately. He didn't call for no doctor. He didn't criticize Isaiah. Immediately, he turned over in his bed, faced the wall, started weeping bitterly, and praying to God and said, God, please save me. Please heal me. And in this story, after he prays this, God sends Isaiah back to Hezekiah. And he says, I have heard your prayer. I have heard your cry. And I am going to add 15 years to your life. And God, we see again the story of God working in an amazing way because Hezekiah went there first when the situation was bad. He knew where to go. He went to God first. He remembered who God was, remembered that he was powerful enough to act. He was honest to God in his request, and God answered it. And I love these two stories because it's just a reminder that there is nothing our God cannot do. And we know that there's some times that God's going to say no. There's some times where God is going to say not now. We don't get the answer that we want. But these two stories are a reminder that in difficult times, no matter what the situation, we can go before God. We can bring our request to Him. And we can remember and have faith in the fact that He is able to work. He is able to move. He's able to do anything that we ask of Him. But the story of Hezekiah in Isaiah, when he's telling this, ends on kind of a sad note. And this is a reminder to us that, in these two difficult situations, Hezekiah went straight to God. He went straight to God to ask for help in the situation he's facing. But in chapter 39, we see a very different kind of story. At this point, Jerusalem is in a relative peace, and some envoys come from Babylon. And at this point, Babylon is not the most powerful nation, but it soon is going to be. Babylon is the one that is going to come and defeat Jerusalem and to Judah. And so some envoys come from Babylon, a far-off nation that were not as powerful. And instead of going before God in this good time and trusting in God and His wisdom, Hezekiah, they come to him and say, "Hey, we heard about you getting healed. What an amazing story. Would you show us around?" And there's nothing in this about Hezekiah going before God, nothing in the story about him praising God for what he had done. What there is a story of Hezekiah showing the envoys from Babylon every single treasure that they have in the temple. He boasted in what he had. He trusted in himself in that moment. And when Isaiah comes later and he sees the envoys and he asks who they are, and he asks Hezekiah, "What did you show them?" And Hezekiah said, "They're from Babylon, and I showed them everything. There's nothing in this temple. There's nothing in this palace that I did not show them." And Isaiah tells him, there's going to come a day when Babylon's going to come back, and they're going to take everything that you show them. And if you know the story of Judah, that is exactly what happened. They came back, they stole all the treasures from the temple and all the treasures from the palace. And it's a good reminder to us as it ends kind of on a sad note for Hezekiah that is just as important to go before God in the good times as it is to go before Him in the bad times, to stay close with Him. If he had been close with God and trusting God, he would have had the wisdom to see, maybe I shouldn't show people from a powerful nation everything that I own. But he didn't. He trusted in himself, and he didn't go before God. And I just want to encourage you with this to be thinking about where you are in your prayer life. If these 3 chapters were stories from your life, what would it look like? Would there be stories of you going straight before God when difficult situations come? Would there be stories about you relying on yourself and not on God? It's an important reminder for you and I as believers in Jesus to remember that God calls us to be a people of prayer, to go before Him in every situation, whether it's good or it's bad, to trust in Him, to have faith in Him, to rely on Him. And when we go before God in prayer, the prayer of Hezekiah is a great example, once again, of how we pray. We remember who God is. We thank Him for everything that He's done. We praise Him for being the one that is able, the only true God. We go before Him and remember who He is. And then we go before Him with honesty. You don't have to hide anything when you go before God. Your God is not sitting there wondering what you're thinking. God knows exactly what you're thinking, exactly what you're struggling with, and where you are. You can go before God with honesty, knowing that He already knows it anyways. And then you go before Him with your request. Trust that He is able to do above and beyond anything you could possibly imagine in your family, in your friends, at work, wherever it is. You have a God that loves you. And so I just want to leave you kind of with a question to think about. If these 3 chapters were about your life, what stories would they be? Would they be stories of God's victory? whether it be stories of you trusting yourself, whether it be a good mixture of the two. You have a call in your life. You may not be a king of Israel, but you are a child of God. And it's someone that God has given the authority to do amazing things in this world if you will trust Him, and you will keep going for Him. So I just want to encourage you with that. Think about this weekend. If you're not the one that would say that I've seen victories and I've seen God working, I've not been faithful in prayer, then make this a week that you're faithful in prayer and see what God will do. I look forward to seeing you this morning at church, and praying for you this morning, and praying that God will work in your life this week. Love you guys.